But I did want to move on because this was actually a really interesting segment on Breaking Points the other day. Marshall Kosloff was actually filling in for Krystal Ball, and they were talking a little bit about this abortion law in Texas and what it will mean for the Democrats going into 2022 and the Republicans. How will this affect midterms, etc. But there's actually a really interesting exchange here at the beginning between Marshall and Saagar that I thought would be worth reacting to. This is actually pretty funny, and I have to say that I have to give major props to Marshall here. I think he did a really good job. But let's take a look at this.
Okay, let's get to the fallout from the Texas law. So this has been fascinating, really, to watch. Also, I heard you. I apologize for the last time I did not explain the private right of action within the Texas law. And so that's actually important. Marshall, can you break that down for people on what exactly it is? Not only does the Texas law ban abortion after 6 weeks, known as a so-called heartbeat mechanism, but it includes, and this is probably the most contentious part of it, private right of action. And this matters, everybody. I promise, in terms of what the corporate fallout from this has been.
Yeah, so the way it effectively works is if a citizen, a resident of Texas, discovers that an individual, a clinic, people involved in the actual process, this could hypothetically even go to a Uber or Lyft driver who actually takes the person to a abortion clinic, is involved, they can actually sue that person.
Okay.
They could actually
privately,
they could privately sue, establishing a civil claim there, which has created a huge amount of controversy, obviously, because in effect, this is deputizing fellow citizens, residents, etc., in the cases that these actually go beyond that 6 week period, which has caused an incredible amount of controversy and has forced anyone wading into this issue to really have to think about their actions a different way. Because just to add the quick thing, the South has been increasing abortion restrictions for over the past decade.
Yeah, that's right.
There's been a consistent effort to push the bounds of Roe v. Wade. You've seen abortion clinics close across the South. What is truly different this time isn't just the 6 weeks, it's really the lawsuits and that private action part.
Yeah, that's right. And I should have explained that previously as to why so many people are upset. So now that context being added, now let's get to what is happening there and how this may play out on the national stage. Because I actually do, look, I think culture wars are actually what is driving most of our politics. And this actually could have a lot of political salience in 2022. So let's put this up there on the screen from The Verge. So what has happened is that GoDaddy, the hosting website, has actually cut off Texas's Right to Life's abortions whistleblowing website, and it might be gone. So GoDaddy gave them 24 hours to find an alternative. Of course, Marshall, this immediately calls to mind things like Parler being removed from the Amazon Web Services. I've spoken previously about how censorship is moving kind of up the levels of technology. And so it used to be that, on the platform itself, we talk about, oh, well, we're going to ban this user, that user, individual for right of action. Then it actually moved up a level to the actual domain hosting. So now it's like, okay, well, we're not going to host your website at all. We're not going to host you on our servers. And eventually, we're going to get to the full ISP, like Comcast should ban X website, so-and-so. We haven't gotten there yet. Unfortunately, I think we eventually will. This kind of has ignited a discussion, especially amongst people on the right, about the ability for the corporation to cut off the hosting service and all that. I think it's very tricky. I'm curious for what you think because, look, I mean, it's a 50-50 issue. Or, look, if you really want to dig into the polling, it's more like a 60-40 issue. But the gray area in between has, kind of people who are extreme in terms of no cases and extreme in terms of all cases. That gray area isn't necessarily being represented by corporate America. At the same time, it's not like corporate America's job necessarily to represent all of the population. So what do you think about all this, kind of looking at this from a tech angle?
Yeah, so I'm going to request that everyone be hyper nuanced with the discussion we're about to have because it shows how complicated this stuff is. So one, I don't quite think the word censorship perfectly applies to what's happening with the web hosting service. I think the clearer framework for understanding is right to refuse service.
Right.
I think it's entirely reasonable for a private company to say, I don't want to host this website. Because once again, it's a hosting service.
Right.
And there are plenty of hosting services. The claim is not that there's a monopoly on hosting services. The only hosting company in the entire world is GoDaddy, and they've refused service.
Right.
As long as there are other services
Namecheap
that can provide
or
it.
whatever. Yeah.
Because once again, like that isn't the protected thing here.
Right.
I'm largely fine. I'm completely fine with that. I think it goes in either direction. And as we discussed with the context, in other contexts, I think there's easily a world where I could see someone on the right, not on this abortion issue, but finding their own specific version of that. I have no problem. I do not think, for example, that a conservative hosting site should have to support a pro-abortion site.
Sure.
This or that. I think that's entirely reasonable. Secondly, though, and this is what I really like with you talking about the ISPs.
Anyway, that's the end of the exchange that I wanted to play because I just thought it was pretty funny. And don't get me wrong, among conservatives, Saagar's definitely one of the more reasonable, if not like the most reasonable. When it comes to like people that I would be willing to talk to that are on the right, Saagar's one of them. I think he has some interesting ideas. He's clearly a smart guy. He's very articulate. I think his heart is in the right place. That being said, it's very telling that when it comes to GoDaddy removing the hosting, hosting the, this whistleblowing website for people to snitch on their neighbors who are abortion patients, and GoDaddy cuts off their website, Saagar immediately begins to cry censorship. This is censorship. This is just like when Parler was removed, etc. And then, Marshall has to come into it and explain that, no, this is not censorship. GoDaddy is a private company. They're protesting essentially this authoritarian law, which threatens people's literal lives and livelihoods, and reproductive rights. They're protesting this law being hosted on their private platform, which is very different than, Facebook removing some user for their political speech, for example. This is not a law that is, this is an actual law. This is a piece of legislation that is being protested. This is a, Supreme Court decision that is being protested. It's not some random person getting kicked off of a platform for saying the wrong thing. But do you know what I'm saying, Zach?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that I think that Marshall hits the nail on the head when he says this is a case of we're debating a right to refuse service, right? So I guess if you want to flip it on the other side of the head, this from a conservative angle, this is like, should a conservative baker be forced to bake a cake for two gay guys that want to get married? Law says I believe the law says they don't have to, right? I think that's the and so then this is the kind of the flip side of that. And Gavin and I are massively anti-censorship. We're pro free speech and all that stuff. But I do think it's really ironic that it's the conservatives, private companies can do whatever they want, rhetoric, like we have to have a free market. Like if you don't like the decision the company's making, start your own company, like go create competition for this company, et cetera, et cetera. And Marshall makes a good point. If we were having a narrow conversation about like a monopolized company, so for example, if Google decided that they were never going to show any search results that were pro-life, Google is a monopoly of a search engine that's going to severely restrict the flow of information. I think you have a much different argument there. Should we strip all conservative ideas from Google search, the literal default search engine for 95% of America, for people who aren't using like Brave or Bing or something, right? So I think that becomes a larger issue because I think there's a strong argument that Google is a monopoly. I don't think GoDaddy is a monopoly, right? Like you can host your fucking website on a dozen different fucking services. So I think that's a nuanced conversation to have, and I was impressed by that. I'm not sure. I don't know a ton about Marshall Kosloff. I know he hosts that show with Saagar, but I thought he made an excellent point right there.
Yeah, he really did. Shout out to Marshall. Again, I'm also not super familiar with all of his politics, but I am generally impressed when I hear him talk. He's very eloquent and usually has very agreeable positions. So yeah, shout out to him. And I just thought this was, again, a really good instance of kind of conservative hypocrisy. They're the first to defend private corporations, and they're the first to defend business owners for turning away people or customers that they don't wish to. But in this case of GoDaddy, it's censorship. But in reality, it's not like any specific person is being censored. GoDaddy is not removing, some anti-abortion activist Facebook page or something. Obviously, that would not be condonable at all. What's going on here is that they threatened and then ultimately did remove the Right to Life website, which was basically encouraging like vigilante justice, I guess would be a good way to put it. Like, just citizens of the state reporting on, snitching on their fellow citizens, which could even, again, implicate like Uber drivers that, take people to their appointment at an abortion clinic. This is insanity. This, in my opinion, totally falls within GoDaddy's right as a private company to do. Again, it's not like they removed just some random conservative who was saying things that they didn't like. This website was literally a whistleblower website promoted to ensure that the lawbreakers are held accountable for their actions. So this is almost like, like working in tandem with the local government, it seems. This far exceeds someone's freedom of speech. This is literally a tool to snitch on and imprison your fellow community members for exercising their reproductive rights. That's totally a different thing. And again, I think it's just telling, despite the fact that Saagar is a pretty smart guy, that, this is definitely a symptom of hardcore conservatism. When it's your side, it's censorship. But otherwise it's, they're exercising their right as a private company, et cetera, et cetera. As you mentioned, we saw that play out during the whole debacle involving the cake baker and their refusal to serve gay people. So, I just thought this was interesting, worth pointing out, and overall a good segment. I would actually recommend you guys check out the full segment. It kind of talks about how, this law might actually help the Democratic Party in 2022, ironically, because it's so insane. It's so fucking crazy that it's going to really energize and activate the Democratic voting base, especially in places like Texas, obviously. And it's going to really turn them out because they're going to use this as a reason why you have to vote blue. You can't let more of these kind of laws be passed. So that, that's going to be their logic. And I think it may be quite effective. So yeah, I would recommend you guys check out the full segment. It's very interesting.